History always demands grand and glorious battles.
In 1813, America launched a massive military invasion. Thousands of armed soldiers marched north to conquer Canada.
With a single objective: to conquer Canada.
They anticipated a fierce and bloody resistance.
The dense Canadian woods were dark and foreboding.
Suddenly, terrifying sounds echoed through the trees.
A massive, unseen force was moving in the dark.
The Americans braced for a brutal ambush.
But the terrifying force waiting for them was just a stray herd of cows.
This is the bizarre truth of the historic Chateauguay campaign. The fate of an entire nation depended entirely on the confused movements of grazing dairy cows.
Act 2.
Abhaudomai. The American plan was extremely ambitious. General Wade Hampton led thousands of confident soldiers northward. Their ultimate destination was the highly strategic city of Montreal. Capturing this territory would effectively cripple the defending British forces. Victory seemed practically guaranteed for the overwhelmingly large American army. But the dense Canadian wilderness held secrets that military maps completely failed to capture.
Nature was waiting.
The environment became hostile immediately. Thick, ancient trees choked the narrow pathways toward the border. Marching in disciplined formation was completely impossible in these woods. Officers struggled to maintain visual contact with their advancing units. Every single step forward required exhausting effort through tangled underbrush. The meticulously planned invasion quickly devolved into a desperately chaotic struggle against the landscape.
Patience wore thin. Then the weather violently turned against them.
A creeping, impenetrable fog descended upon the vast, swampy forest. Visibility dropped to a mere handful of feet in seconds.
The damp air muffled the desperate shouts of separated commanders.
Soldiers blindly stumbled over hidden routes and deep, muddy ravines. Without reliable communication or clear sightlines, the massive American military machine began to fracture into isolated fragments.
Paranoia crept in.
Fear thrives in the absolute darkness. The scattered troops anticipated a brutal ambush at any moment. Canadian militiamen were known for their highly effective guerrilla tactics. Every snapping twig sounded exactly like an approaching enemy musket. The arduous journeys of the era demanded profound resilience from these young travelers. The suffocating white mist transformed ordinary forest noises into terrifying phantoms of an invisible enemy.
Shadows became monsters.
The chain reaction had officially begun.
Advanced scouting parties lost their bearings entirely in the gloom.
They accidentally circled back toward their own approaching infantry lines. Friendly fire incidents narrowly missed, triggering a catastrophic internal slaughter.
Trust completely eroded as commanders desperately tried to restore order.
This profound loss of situational awareness created the perfect psychological conditions for a massive delusion.
The trap set.
Meanwhile, local farmers carried on normally.
They possessed absolutely no awareness of the impending military disaster.
Their primary concern was simply managing their modest agricultural livelihoods. Livestock roamed freely throughout the contested territory without any supervision. These ordinary animals grazed lazily along the dense forest perimeter.
It is a bizarre historical irony that agricultural routines perfectly intersected with a major military invasion.
Worlds slowly collided.
The cows wore heavy brass bells.
This simple tool helped farmers locate their wandering dairy herds.
The clanking metal echoed strangely through the dense, foggy woods.
To a farmer, the noise simply indicated a productive pasture.
To a terrified soldier, the sound carried a totally different meaning. The rhythmic clanking was horribly misinterpreted as the movement of an unseen military force.
A fatal misjudgment.
The stage for disaster was complete.
Tired, paranoid soldiers strained their ears against the blinding white fog.
They desperately tried to analyze the strange, clanking acoustic signals.
The heavy footsteps of grazing cattle sounded like marching infantry. The chaotic rustling of hooves mimicked the deployment of troops.
A totally mundane agricultural reality was actively rewriting the operational intelligence of the entire American army.
The illusion solidified.
Anxiety rapidly infected the command structure.
Officers received panicked reports regarding heavily armed units moving nearby.
Scouts claimed the enemy was actively maneuvering to surround them.
The sheer volume of ringing bells suggested an overwhelming numerical superiority.
Logic entirely vanished as the collective delusion gripped the ranks.
The human mind fills visual gaps by projecting terrible fears into the unknown.
Rationality completely collapsed.
The British defenders barely fired shots.
A small Canadian force had established defensive barricades further ahead.
They simply waited while the American invasion stalled in confusion.
Nature was effectively doing the grueling combat work for them.
The formidable American war machine was essentially defeating itself internally.
This cascading series of minor environmental disruptions systematically dismantled one of the era's grandest military campaigns.
The breaking point.
3.
The foggy woods suddenly erupted.
The terrified American vanguard heard the deafening metal clatter.
Cowbells rang out violently from every single direction.
Heavy hooves trampled the damp earth with immense weight.
Blinded soldiers panicked as the chaotic noises aggressively multiplied.
In the blinding mist, the grazing herd transformed into an aggressive phantom army. Panic took over. Muskets fired into the mist. Terrified riflemen unleashed volleys against the completely invisible threat. Gunfire flashed brightly against the thick, suffocating white fog. Friendly units heard the shooting and immediately returned fire. Chaos completely consumed the deeply fractured American military lines. The grand invasion force was now fiercely battling the shadows of wandering livestock.
The turning point.
Commanding officers quickly screamed, "Retreat!" General Hampton believed he was severely outnumbered and flanked. The terrifying acoustic illusion completely broke their remaining morale. Soldiers threw down their heavy gear and fled southward. The entire offensive crumbled without fighting a real enemy. In a stunning display of mass hysteria, the entire invading army was completely routed by cows.
The retreat accelerated.
Humiliation replaced the initial terror. Thousands of professional soldiers sprinted frantically toward the border. They abandoned crucial supplies inside the muddy, tangled forest. The myth of an unstoppable invasion force was shattered. A handful of bewildered farmers eventually reclaimed their livestock.
The grandest territorial ambitions of the American military command were entirely derailed by absolute bovine ignorance.
The silence returned.
The dense woods remained unconquered. Canadian territory was perfectly preserved by sheer, ridiculous luck.
The legendary Battle of Chateauguay became a comedic masterpiece.
The official military reports struggled to explain the disaster.
Admitting defeat to local dairy cows was politically impossible.
The profound embarrassment of this bizarre retreat was quietly buried inside military archives.
The phantom vanished. Nature reclaimed the quiet battlefield.
The aggressive clanking bells transformed back into pastoral sounds.
The terrifying invisible enemies returned to chewing green grass.
No massive Canadian army emerged from the swirling mists. The Americans had simply run away from their imaginations.
The most decisive military action was ultimately performed by a chewing dairy heifer. Act 4. The history books often lie. We prefer to remember wars as grand, strategic chess matches.
Generals are painted as brilliant architects of glorious, sweeping victories. Yet the bizarre reality of Chateauguay reveals a more chaotic truth. This strangely hilarious historical anomaly reminds us that human ambition remains incredibly fragile.
A humbling realization.
Montreal was completely saved.
The Canadian frontier remained perfectly intact against an overwhelming force. It was not merely secured by brilliant tactical defensive maneuvering. It was rescued by the unpredictable absurdity of wandering livestock. This profoundly bizarre twist of fate perfectly illustrates how nature's most mundane creatures rewrite national destinies.
The ultimate variable. We crave logical, historical narratives.
When immense events occur, we actively search for equally immense causes. We expect massive armies to be defeated by superior military intelligence. We entirely dismiss the random, uncontrollable elements of the natural world. The chaotic theater of war is always vulnerable to utterly unpredictable, mundane absurdities.
We forget this.
A fog concealed the truth. An invading army was thoroughly defeated by the echo of cowbells. This single event profoundly altered the developing border of North America. We must always remember that truth is stranger than military fiction.
Ultimately, the terrifying mystery of the Phantom Army was resolved by a herd of lost dairy cows.
History is strange.
The mystery finally concludes here.
We have uncovered the ridiculous truth behind this massive military failure. We want to hear your insightful thoughts on this bizarre narrative. Please tell us what weird historical mystery we should investigate next. What other bizarre, forgotten accidents of nature have secretly altered the grand course of our shared history?
End of script. Conclusion.